William. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And may I also add my welcome to this first Philosophy of Physics conference. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I have to say I'm a gatecrasher. I met William at a meeting on persons and brains in Oxford, and he sort of hinted that this meeting was going on and then sent me the programme. I don't think he was quite expecting me to say, "Can I come, please?" But here I am anyway, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here. And the theme really appeals to me for reasons that William's already touched on. There is an absolutely star-studded cast of speakers, and actually a somewhat star-studded audience, consisting largely of philosophers, physicists, and theologians, and there's one other lonely medic like myself. So it should be the basis for a very interesting discussion. Just a quick word on timing. We deliberately delayed our start because we wanted to make sure everybody was in place, including our speakers. But I'm speaking on behalf of all my fellow chairs now, that we will ask our speakers to stick to time. They will get injury time. We start late, they can finish late. But they're each due to speak for about an hour, and we want to make absolutely sure we have time for Q&A, because you'll be, I know, dying to say things. And that may mean, because we start a little bit late, we lose a little bit of coffee time, and we lose a little bit of lunch time. But I'm sure your appetite for knowledge far exceeds your appetite for grosser things like coffee and potatoes. Okay. Yep. And really picking up on what Willie was saying, the feeling in some circles is that philosophy is now rather passé. And my favourite definition of philosophy comes from Wilfred Sellars. It's an inquiry into how things in the wider sense hang together in the deeper sense of hanging together, coherence. And some people say that's what physics is. Do we need philosophy? Does philosophy need physics? Well, there's some people, as William was alluding to, certainly feel philosophy needs physics, or physics needs philosophy like a hole in the head. Some of you will remember a great fuss caused by Stephen Hawking when his most recent popular book declared that philosophy is dead because it's not kept up with modern developments in science, particularly physics. Stephen Weinberg said rather similar and perhaps even more disparaging things in an earlier book of his. The insights of the philosophers I studied seemed murky and inconsequential compared with the dazzling successes of physics and mathematics. Even where the insights of philosophers have occasionally benefited physics, this has been generally in a negative fashion, by protecting them from the preconceptions of other philosophers. However, we can just kick back a little bit. Of course, physics essentially is mathematical, and Bertrand Russell famously said that physics is mathematical, not because we know so much about the physical world, but because we know so little. That doesn't impress people like David Moen, although he's denied actually saying this. He ascribed it to Richard Feynman, quite plausibly I would say, who when asked, what's the meaning of quantum mechanics, and so he said, forget meanings, just shut up and calculate. And of course that is highly unsatisfactory, certainly for someone like myself who's no good at calculations. So I put to you that metaphysics is not yet dead. Again, William alluded to this. The smoke and mirrors offers that we have for the origin of the universe don't impress people who are slightest bit philosophically sophisticated. We have problems, major paradoxes, which is going to form the theme of today, in the way physics thinks about the fundamental stuff of the world, and indeed the way philosophy thinks about the fundamental stuff of the world. Physics has having huge problems with time, of course. It may not lose time completely, but poor old tense time has a tense time in physics. And then there's the problem of consciousness in a material world. What a pest that is. We can't really account for the observer emerging in the material world of classical physics. We have huge problems, as we will discuss, of course, of the observer in quantum physics. We have problems with phenomenal appearances. How out of the material world should one bit of the material world appear to another bit of the material world, particularly as the appearances seem to be somewhat distanced from how they should be according to the accounts of physics. We don't understand what knowledge is. And then there are one or two scraps that many physicists would allocate to philosophers, such as the origin and the place of meaning and mattering in a largely meaningless world of matter. But I think the really interesting question is one that Sellars again posed 20, 30, 40 years ago, which is we need to think about the relationship between the manifest image of the world as it's presented to us, as I'm standing up here now, and the scientific image, particularly, of course, the quantum image. And I think that is the really interesting question, and where we do need the philosophy of physics and philosophy of physicists to get together. So I would put to you that there is work to be done. It doesn't really matter who does the work, whether physicists do it in-house or they outsource it to philosophers. Better still, the kind of things going on today, they should work together as equal partners. But we have to characterize the work has to be done. Gertrude Stein, on her deathbed, said, "What is the answer?" There was no response, so her final words were, "Okay, what's the question?" And I think we may spend a bit of time today defining what are the questions that face us when we're trying to make, as it were, human sense of the deliverances of physics. And we have to think about the appropriate use of different methods. The battered old armchair of conceptual analysis, thought experiments, mathematical modelling, empirical research. But I would put to you that two-way traffic must be the name of the game. And I offer you finally two thoughts for the day. Here's the first thought. The replacement of classical physics by quantum physics requires a thoroughgoing modification of our worldview. Or as philosophers might say, it requires a modification of our fundamental physics. But if we put bad metaphysics into our scientific theories, we can expect to get bad metaphysics out of them. Well, it's extremely handy that the source of those two quotations is our next speaker, Hans Holgersen. And it is my great pleasure to introduce him. He's the chap, I think, he's the chap on the left, I think. Anyway, it's one of those two anyway. It's in the building behind him, that's for sure, so you can make your decision as he mounts the podium. But Hans has a stunning, indeed terrifying CV. He's a full professor of philosophy at Princeton University. He's an associate professor of mathematics, and he has written widely in both philosophical and mathematical topics. He's written on his particular areas of competence are philosophical logic, the philosophy of mathematics, the philosophy of religion, and the philosophy of science. I was looking at his work in progress, and some really tasty ones. Does quantum mechanics kill time? I've killed to read that paper, I can tell you. And how is spontaneous symmetry breaking possible, which of course is extremely topical. Anyway, I could spend the rest of the morning telling you about his CV, but I guess you're rather keen to hear me stop talking and to hear him start talking. So Hans, the floor is yours.